your research, and there are other stories to be told, including the story of a little girl named Katie. Tell us that story.
Well, before I get to Katie, I should say that we created embryos for 5 other couples, and we transferred those embryos. Unfortunately, we had no pregnancy established, and there's a reason for that. We know why the pregnancy was not established, but we also did a side project via which we have taken cells from 3 deceased individuals at the demand of their parents that lost those children. And we have used them experimentally using a bovine experimental model that we developed. That is, it's a remarkable unit. It's a remarkable model, biological model that we developed. And now the British are trying to imitate us for that.
This is cow tissue.
Cow tissue, cow eggs that are obviously using human somatic cells. We have introduced them into the cow egg, and then that particular cell that we use, the human cell that carries the human DNA, grows into becoming a ball of cells that is an embryo. But that embryo is not defined as a human embryo. The ball of cells is human, but it's surrounded by bovine tissue. And therefore, this is what we call a hybrid embryo. And we have used those cells from those 3 deceased individuals. One of them was Katie, that died in an accident. And, you know, it was obviously, the whole story has a different angle to it, talking to her mother, as you'll see on this documentary. That we were able to create embryos, hybrid embryos for Katie and another individual, where the third one we were not able to. And merely we used this biological model to test whether the cells from those 3 deceased individuals are viable enough, functional enough, capable enough of initiating what we call this reprogramming of DNA and creation of human embryos that can be made in the future for the idea of creating a human being out of those cells.
Dr. Zavos, was that attempt successful?
Well, the attempt using the hybrid embryo was successful 2 out of the 3. And one of them was Katie. Katie was a 10, 11-year-old child that died in a car accident. That her mother called me one day and says, Dr. Zavos, can you help me? And she flew to Kentucky, she met with me, and we were able to accept her tissues and proceed with that.
How confident are you that in this next stage you will have a pregnancy?
Well, you have to operate with confidence. I mean, once you don't have confidence, you might as well stay home and mow the lawn. And therefore, our confidence is there. The reason being is that we were able to, at the moment, our team is able to create 50% embryos from cells or eggs that are given to us. In other words, if we start with 10 eggs, we are able to create 5 embryos. The number that I gave you before, when they created Dolly, they had 237 eggs, and they were able to create only 22 embryos. And from those 22 created 1 Dolly. So the efficiency of the system has grown tremendously. And I'm not totally surprised about this, because we know a heck of a lot about human reproductive medicine and artificial means via which we can create children in a test tube than we know about sheep. We've been doing this since Louise Brown was born in 1978 for 31 years now, and there are almost 1.5 million people born from IVF. So we know how to manipulate human eggs and embryos in vitro than we do in sheep.
But doctor, you certainly recognize the difference in the work that you've done on in vitro, IVF, and that perfected procedure. Now to go to this conclusion of using cow tissue, if you will, to create a human being, you do understand the controversy that you've created and the critics that have said that you are indeed playing God and are a monster. How do you answer those critics?
Well, it's easy for me to answer. First of all, the model that we use of the bovine hybrid embryos using cow eggs and human genome is just an experimental thing. We have not used that to create a human being. We use normally human eggs and human cells to create a human embryo and then transfer that embryo in a uterus of a woman for the purpose of creating a human being 9 months thereafter. For me to defend that or whatever, I don't have any problem with that, because we're simply, what we do when we do this cloning business is that everything is very similar to IVF, in vitro fertilization, creating a test tube baby in a petri dish. The difference is that instead of using a sperm and an egg to fertilize each other, we use one egg, and then we take the genome, the DNA from an adult, we introduce it in this egg, we stimulate it to undergo what we call reprogramming and reactivation, and we create a human embryo out of that you cannot tell it apart from a sexually produced embryo, and then we transfer it in utero.
You've said this is chapter 1.
That's right.
The documentary will air worldwide except in the United States, and we'll address that hopefully at the end, and we're running out of time. Chapter 1, after the documentary airs worldwide, you begin chapter 2. What is that?
Chapter 2 is going to involve the creation of more embryos, but we will be more selective in getting men and women, couples, that are aiming to have a child, but it would be younger, much more capable of reproducing. The last 5 couples that we've done in chapter 1, if you will, there were women, the women were postmenopausal. So even if we transferred healthy embryos in those women, most probably they would not get pregnant. The reason that we transfer them in them is that the couples desire to have that. And we could not really argue with them. We did not want to argue with those women that wanted to bear their own children. We did not go to a surrogate. We did not go to anything else other than the women that they were 50 and 55 years old. Therefore, now in chapter 2, we're going to be more aggressive, more proactive in creating healthier embryos and transferring in healthier women for the idea of giving birth.
Dr. Zavos, the documentary airs in Europe on Discovery UK. It has been on the air in April. When this taping is shown here in Kentucky and in the United States. That is the chapter 2 that will begin now. You are hopeful that you can produce a human embryo, create a human being, create a baby in what we have termed chapter 2?
That's our hope. Obviously.
When will that happen?
Well,
are we talking months or years?
Well, we do not know that, obviously. I mean, while you play, you're going to obviously be successful. I mean, after you create embryos and you transfer them in women, then what do you expect to get after that? Obviously, you're going to get a pregnancy. Hopefully, it's going to be at the beginning of those transfers or at the end of those transfers. We will obviously be making adjustments as we go along in order to create better embryos, transform in much more reproductively sound women with the idea of creating a child. And then, of course, after it takes and implants, we're going to have to follow it up for 9 months and deliver a healthy child 9 months thereafter.
Are you afraid of the controversy?
Not necessarily. I think the controversy is something that I'm not scared of. I'm aware of that. As long as you do good work, Bill, and you feel comfortable with your efforts as offering medically sound procedures, I think that the controversy is not something that scares me or frightens me or makes me run away from it. You know, we all have to prove ourselves every day.
You have 2 beautiful young children.
Yes.
Would you have wanted one of them to be produced in the laboratory?
It's an extremely hypothetical question. I'm not sure that I would even have any of my children produced via artificial means. But that's my own gut feeling. I was blessed with 2 very lovely daughters, Gio and Theo. I love them to death. They're very healthy. They're very smart, very intelligent. They lecture to me, 6 and 10 years old. And that's the way that I get my kicks. And I want others to have the same kicks in life as I do. Some of us are privileged to turn the lights off and have sex with your wife, and then 9 months thereafter you have a child. But we're not that all privileged. Almost 40% of couples that are walking around a reproductive age in the USA have some sort of an infertility problem. And therefore, we have to pay attention to those non-privileged parents-to-be. And that's what I am after.
Dr. Zavos,
I'm here to help others.
We will look forward to Chapter 2 and have you back to talk about that at that time.
Thank you very much for having me.
For 1 to 1, I'm Bill Goodman.